conceal himself there before blood retired. Then, he told himself with a pleasant sensation of virtue, he would employ reason, if reason would serve, if it would not. It would not, and the fault would be Blood's, not his. Those who oppose the will of a god, even a minor god like the outsider, were bound to suffer. Silk was pushing the long handle of his hatchet through the rope around his waist when he heard a soft thump behind him. Dropping the trapdoor, he whirled. Leaping so that it appeared taller than many men, a huge bird flapped misshapen wings, shrieked like a dozen devils, and struck at his eyes with its hooked bill. Instinctively, he threw himself backward onto the top of the trapdoor and kicked. His left foot caught the white-headed bird full in the body without slowing its attack in the least. Vast wings thundering, it lunged after him as he rolled away. By some prodigy of good luck he caught it by its downy neck, but the carpals of its wings were as hard as any man's knuckles, and were driven by muscles more powerful than the strongest. They battered him mercilessly as both tumbled. The edge of the crenelle between two merlons was like a wedge driven into his back. Still struggling to keep the bird's cruel, hooked beak from his face and eyes, he jerked the hatchet free. A carpal struck his forearm like a hammer, and the hatchet fell to the stone pavement of the terrace below. The white-headed one's other carpal struck his temple, and the illusory nature of the world of the senses was made manifest. It narrowed to a miniature, artificially bright, which Silk endeavored to push away until it winked out. Chapter 6. The whole swam beneath Silk's flying, beclouded eyes, highland and tableland, jungle and dry scrub, savanna and pampa. The plaything of 100 idle winds, buffeted yet at peace, he sailed over them all, dizzy with his own height and speed, his shoulder nudged by storm cloud, the solitary flyer 60 leagues below him, a darting dragonfly with wings of lace. A black dragonfly that vanished into blacker cloud, into distant voices and the odor of carrion. Ugh! Silk choked on his own spew and spat. Terror rose from the wheeling scene to foot him like a falcon, its icy talons in his vitals. He had blinked, and in that single blink the whirl had rolled over like a wind-tumbled basket or a wave-tossed barrel. The drifting skylands were up in the uneven, unyielding surface on which he lay down. His head throbbed and spun, and an arm and both legs burned. He sat up. His mouth was wet with slime, his black robe discolored and stinking. He wiped them clumsily with numbed hands, then wiped his hand on his robe and spat again. The grey stone of the battlement had been crowding his left shoulder. The bird he had fought, the white-headed one,
of Mooker's warning, was nowhere to be seen. Or perhaps, he thought, he had only dreamed of a terrible bird. He stood staggered and fell to his knees. His eyes closed of themselves. He had dreamed it all, his tortured mind writhing among nightmares, the horrible bird, the horned beasts with their incandescent stares, the miserable mad girl, his dark rope reaching blindly again and again for new height, the silent forest, the burly burglar with his hired donkeys, and the dead man sprawled beneath the swinging, hanging lamp. But he was awake now, awake at last, and the night was spent, awake and kneeling beside his own bed in the manse, on Sun Street. It was shade up, and today was Sphinx Day. Already he should be chanting stabbing Sphinx's morning prayer.
O divine lady of the swords, of the gathering armies, of the swords, Hippo, he fell forward, retching, his hands on the still warm, rounded tiles. The second time he was wiser, not attempting to stand until he was confident that he could do so without falling. Before he gained his feet, while he lay trembling beside the battlement, dawn faded and winked out. It was night again, Feasday night once more, an endless night that had not yet ended and might never end. Rain, he thought, might wash him clean and clear his head, and so he prayed for rain mostly to Phaea and Paz, but to Scylla as well, remembering all the while how many men better than himself were imploring the gods as he did, and for better reasons how long had they been praying, offering such small sacrifices as they could, washing great passes images in orchards of dying, trees and in fields of stunted corn. It did not rain or even thunder. Excited voices drifted to him from somewhere far away. He caught the name Hyrax repeated over and over. Someone or something had died. Hyrax?
Feather had replied at the Palestra a week or two before, fumbling after some fact associated with the familiar name of the god of death.
Hyrax is right in the middle of Paz and Echidna's sons, Feather, or of all their children, of their whole family, Patera. There's only the 2 boys in it.
Feather also was one of a pair of brothers.
Hyrax and Tartaros. Feather had waited fearfully for correction, but he, Patera Silk, had smiled and nodded. Tartaros is the oldest and Hyrax is the youngest.
Feather had continued encouraged. Mater's cubit stick tapped her lectern.
The older Feather, and the younger. You said yourself that there were only two. Here, Axe, said someone far below the other side of the battlement. Silk stood up, his head still throbbed, and his legs were stiff, but he did not feel as though he were about to gag again. The chimneys. They all looked the same now, and the beckoning trapdoor seemed an impossible distance away. Still reeling and dizzy, he embraced a merlon with both arms and peered over the battlement. As if it belonged to someone else, he noted that his right forearm was oozing blood. Onto the grey stones, 40 cubits and more below, 3 men and 2 women were standing in a rough circle on the terrace, all of them looking down at something. For a slow half-minute at least, Silk could not be certain what it was. A third woman pushed one of the others aside, then turned away as if in disgust. There was more talk until one of the armoured guards arrived with a lamp. The bird, Mooka's white-headed one, lay dead upon the flagstones, appearing smaller than Silk could have imagined, its unequal wings half spread, its long white neck bent, back at an unnatural angle. He had killed it, or rather, it had killed itself. One of the men around the dead bird glanced upward, saw Silk watching him, pointed, and shouted something Silk could not understand. Rather too late, or so he feared, he waved as though he were a member of the household and retreated up the steep slope of the roof. The trapdoor opened upon the dim and lofty attic he had glimpsed earlier, a cobwebbed cavern more than half filled with musty furniture and splintering crates. Feeble lights kindled at the muted clank of his foot upon the first iron step. He had hardly descended to the second when one winked out. It was a promising place in which to conceal himself, but it would no doubt be the first to be searched, should the man on the terrace raise the alarm. Silk had rejected it by the time he reached the bottom of the spiraling steps, and with a pang of regret hurried straight to the wider wooden stair and ran down them to the upper floor of the original villa. Here a narrow, tapestry-covered door opened onto a wide and luxuriously furnished corridor not far from a balustraded staircase up which cultured voices floated. A fat, formally dressed man sat in an elaborate red, velvet and gilt armchair a few steps from the top of the staircase. His arms rested on a rosewood table, and his head upon his folded arms. He snored softly as Silk passed, jerked to wakefulness, stared uncomprehendingly at Silk's black robe, and lowered his head to his arms again. The stair was thickly carpeted, its steps broad, and its slant gentle. It terminated in a palatial reception hall, in which 5 men dressed much like the sleeper stood deep in conversation. Several were holding tumblers, and none seemed alarmed. Some distance beyond them, the reception hall ended with wide double doors, doors that stood open at pray's end, so that the soft autumn night itself appeared as a species of skylight hanging in Blood's hall. Beyond any question, Silk decided, those doors represented the principal entrance to the villa. The portico he had studied from the wall would be on the other side, and indeed, when he had surveyed the scene below him for a moment, not leaning across the balustrade as he had so unwisely leaned across the battlement to stare down at the flaccid form of the white-headed one, but from the opposite side of the corridor, with his back against the nude, half-again life-size statue of some minor goddess, he could just make out the ghostly outlines of the pillars. Unbidden, the Mantian's familiar, fire-crowned altar rose before him as he stared at the open doors, the altar, the manse, the palastra, and the shady arbor where he had sometimes chatted too long with Matera Marble. Suppose that he were to walk down the staircase quite normally, stroll through that hall, nodding and smiling to anyone who glanced toward him. Would any of them stop him or call for guards? It seemed unlikely. His own hot blood trickling down his right arm wet his fingers and dripped onto Blood's costly carpet. Shaking his bead, Silk strode swiftly past the stair and seated himself in the matching red armchair on the other side. As long as his arm blood, he could be tracked by his blood down the spiral, stair from the roof, down the attic stair, and along Phil's corridor. Parting his robe, he started a tear above the hem of his tunic with his teeth and ripped away a strip. Could not the blood trail be turned to his advantage? Silk rose and walked rapidly along the corridor, flexing his wrist and clenching his right hand to increase the bleeding. It entered the south wing by a short flight of steps. There lie halted for a moment to win the strip about his wound knotted with his teeth, just as Gibb, the big man in the had. When he had satisfied himself that it would remain in place, he retraced his steps, passing the chair in which he had sat, the stairhead, the sleeper, and the narrow tapestry-covered door leading to the attic. Here, beyond paired icons of the minor deities Ganymedia and Catamitus, wide and widely spaced doors alternated with elaborately framed mirrors and amphorae overfilled with hothouse roses. As Silk approached the entrance to the north wing, an officer in the uniform of the guard emerged from an archway at the end of the corridor. The door nearest Silk stood half open. He stepped inside and shut it softly behind him. He found himself facing a windowless pentagonal drawing-room furnished in magnificent chryselephantine. For a moment he waited with his back to the corridor door, listening as he had listened so often that night. When he heard nothing, he crossed the thick carpet and opened one of the drawing-room's ivory-encrusted doors. This was a boudoir, larger and even more oddly shaped. There were wardrobes, 2 chairs, a rather tawdry shrine of Cyprus whose smouldering thurible filled the room with the sweetness of frankincense, and a white dressing table before a glass whose pearlescent glow appeared to intensify as he entered. When he shut the door behind him, a swirl of colours danced across the glass. He fell to his knees. "Sir," looking up, Silk saw that the glass held only the grey face of a monitor. He traced the sign of addition. "Wasn't there a god? I saw pop. I am no god, sir, merely the monitor of this terminal. What may I do to serve you, sir? Would you care to critique your digitally enhanced image?" Disconcerted, Silk stood. "I know, thank you." He struggled to recall how Ock had addressed the monitor in his glass. "I'd like to speak to a friend, if it isn't too much trouble, my son."
That had not been it, surely. The floating face appeared to nod. The F.
"Rin's name, please. I will attempt it." "Ack, and this Ock lives where?" "In the Orilla." "Do you know where that is?" "Indeed I do, sir. However, there are 54 Ocks resident there." "Can you supply the street?" "No, I'm afraid I have no idea." Suddenly wary, Silk drew out the dressing table, somewhat soiled, little stool, and sat down. "I'm sorry to have put you to so much trouble. But if you're... There is an Ock in the Orilla with whom my master has spoken several times."
The monitor interrupted.
"No doubt he is the Ock you want. I will attempt to locate him for you." "No,"
Silk said.
"This Ock lives in what used to be a shop. So it must be on a shopping street, I suppose, with a lot of other stores and so on. Or at least on a street that used to have them." Remembering it, he recalled the thunder of the cartwheels. "A street paved with cobblestones. Does that help?" "Yes, that is the Ock with whom my master speaks, sir. Let us see whether he is at home." The monitor's face faded, replaced by Ock's disordered bed and jar of slops. Soon the image swelled and distorted, becoming oddly rounded. Silk saw the heavy wooden chair from which he had shriven Ock and beside which he had knelt when Ock shrived him. He found it heartening, somehow, to know that the chair was still there. "I fear that Ock is unavailable, sir." "May I leave a message with my similitude?" Yes." Silk stroked his cheek. "Ask him, please, to tell Ock that I appreciate his help very, very much, and that if nothing happens to me, it will be my great pleasure to tell Maytera Mint how kind he was. Tell him, too, that he's specified only one meritorious act thus far, while the penance he laid upon me called for 2 or 3, for 2 at least. Ask him to let me know what the others should be." Too late, it occurred to Silk that Ock had asked that his name not be mentioned to the handsome boy who had spoken though Blood's glass. "Now then, my son, you referred to your master. Who is that?" "Blood, sir, your host." "I see. Am I, by any chance, in Blood's private quarters now?" "No, sir, these are my mistress's chambers. Will you tell Blood about the message I left for that man who lives in the Orilla?" The monitor nodded gravely. "Certainly, sir, if he inquires." "I see." A sickening sense of failure descended upon Silk. "Then please tell Ock. Also, where I was when I tried to speak to him, and warn him to be careful." "I shall, sir." "Will that be all?" Silk's head was in his hands. "Yes, and thank you. No."
He straightened up.
"I need a place to hide, a good place and weapons. If I may say so, sir," remarked the monitor, "you require a proper dressing more than either. With respect, sir, you are dripping on our carpet." Lifting his right arm, Silk saw that it was true. Blood had already soaked Darrow the strip of black cloth he had torn from his tunic a few minutes earlier. Crimson rivulets trickled toward his elbow. "You will observe, sir, that this room has 2 doors in addition to that through which you entered. The one to your left opens upon the balneum. My mistress's medicinal supplies are there, I believe. As to..." Silk had risen so rapidly that he had knocked over stool. Darting through the left-hand door, he heard nothing more. The balneum was larger than he had anticipated, with a jade tub more than big enough for the naked, goddess at the head of the staircase, and a separate water closet. A sizable cabinet held a startling array of apothecary bottles, an ola of violet salve that Silk recognized as a popular recept, a roll of gauze and gauze pads of various sizes. A small pair of scissors cut away the blood-soaked strip. He smeared the ragged wound that the white-headed one's beak had left in his forearm with the violet, and at the second try managed to bandage it effectively. As he ruefully took stock of his ruined tunic, he discovered that the bird's talons had raked his chest and abdomen. It was almost a relief to wash and salve the long, bloody scratches on which he could employ both his hands. Yellowish incrustations were forming on his robe, where he had wiped away his spew. He took it off and washed it as thoroughly as he could in the lavabo, wrung it out, smoothed it as well as he could, pressed it between two dry towels, and put it back on. Inspecting his appearance in a mirror, he decided that he might well pass a casual examination in a dim light. Returning to the boudoir, he strewed what he took to be face powder over the clotted blood on the carpet. The monitor watched him unperturbed. "That is most interesting, sir. Thank you." Silk shut the powder box and returned it to the dressing table. "Does the powder possess cleansing properties?" "I was unaware of it." Silk shook his head. "Not that I know of. I'm only masking these so visitors won't be unsettled." "Very shrewd, sir." Silk shrugged. "If I could think of something better, I'd—" Tetlunchi. "Do it. When I came in, you said that you weren't a god. I knew you weren't. We had a glass in a palastra I attended. Would you like to speak to someone there, sir?" "Not now. But I was privileged to use that glass once, and it struck me then. I suppose it struck all of us, and I remember some of us talking about it one evening, that the glass looked a great deal like a sacred window. Except for its size, of course, all sacred windows are 8 cubits by 8. Are you familiar with them?" "No, sir."
Silk righted the stool and sat down.
"There's another difference, too. Sacred windows don't have monitors." "That is unfortunate, sir." "Indeed."
Silk stroked his cheek with 2 fingers.
"I should tell you, then, that the immortal gods appear at times in the sacred windows." "Yes, my son. I've never seen one in most people. Those who aren't augurs or sibyls, particularly, can't see the gods at all. Although they frequently hear the voice of the god, they see only a swirl of color." The monitor's face flushed brick red. "Like this, sir?" "No, not at all like that. I was going to say that, as I understand it, those people who can see the gods first see the swirling colors as well. When the theophany begins, the colors are seen. Then the god appears. And then the colors reappear briefly as the god vanishes. All this was set down in circumstantial detail by the devoted Cadus nearly 2 centuries ago. In the course of a long life, he'd witnessed the theophanies of Echidna, Tytaros, and Scylla, and finally that of Paz. He called the colors he'd seen the holy hues. Fascinating, sir. I fear, however, that it has little to do with me. May I show you what it is I do, sir? What I do most frequently, I should say. Observe." The monitor's floating face vanished, replaced by the image of a remarkably handsome man in black. Although the tunic of the man in the glass was torn and white gauze showed beneath it, Silk did not recognize this man as himself until he moved and saw the image move with him. "How's that?"
He leaned closer.
"But thank you, sir," his image said and bowed. "Only a first attempt, although I think it a rather successful one. I shall do better next time. Take it away, please. I am already too much given to vanity, believe me." "As you wish, sir," his image replied. "I intended no disrespect. I merely desired to demonstrate to you the way in which I most frequently serve my mistress. Would you care to see her in place of yourself? I can easily display an old likeness." Silk shook his head. "An old unlikeness, you mean. Please return to your normal appearance." "As you wish, sir." In the glass, Silk's face lost its blue eyes and brown cheeks. Its neck and shoulders vanished, and its features became flatter and coarser. "We were speaking of the gods. No doubt I told you a good deal that you already knew." "No, sir, I know very little about gods, sir. I would advise you to consult an augur." "Then let's talk about monitors, my son. You must know more than most about monitors." "You're a monitor yourself." "My task is my joy, sir. We're fortunate, then, both of us. When I was in the house of a certain man I know, a man who has a glass like this one, he clapped his hands to summon the monitor." "Is that the usual method?" "Clapping the hands or tapping on the glass, sir. All of us much prefer the former, if I may be excused for saying it." "I see." Silk nodded to himself. "Aren't there any other methods?" "We actually appear in response to any loud sound, sir, to determine whether there is something amiss. Should a fire be in progress, for example, I would notify my master or his steward and warn his guests. And from time to time—"
Silk said,
"You must look into this room, although no one has called you, even when there has been no loud sound. Isn't that so? Sir, you don't simply look in to make certain everything's all right." "No, sir, my mistress would consider that an invasion of her privacy, I'm sure. When I entered this room—"
Silk continued,
"I did not make any sound that could be called loud, or at least none that I'm aware of. Certainly I didn't clap my hands or tap on this glass, yet you appeared. There was a swirl of color, then your face appeared in the glass. Shortly afterward you told me you weren't a god. You closed the door, sir?" "Very gently," Silk said. I didn't want to disturb your mistress.
Most considerate, sir.
Yet the sound of my shutting that door summoned you. I would think that in that case almost any sound would do, however slight.
I really cannot say what summoned me, sir. That's a suggestive choice of words, my son.
I concede that it may be, sir. The Monito.
That's a suggestive choice of words, my son.
I concede that it may be, sir. The monitor's face appeared to nod. Such being the case, perhaps
I may proffer an additional sou. Such being the case, perhaps I may proffer an additional suggestion. It is that you abandon this line of inquiry. It will not reward your persistence, sir. Prior to entering the balneum, you inquired about weapons, sir, and places of concealment. One of our wardrobes might do.
Thank you.
Silk looked into the nearest, but it was filled almost to bursting with coats and gowns.
As to weapons, sir,
the monitor continued,
you may discover a useful one in my lowest left drawer, beneath the stockings. More useful than this, I hope.
Silk closed the wardrobe. I am very sorry, sir. There appear to have been many purchases of late of which
I have not been apprised. Silk hardly heard him. There were angry and excited voices in the corridor.
He opened the door to the drawing-room and listened until they faded away, his hand upon the glass latch bar of the boudoir door, acutely conscious of the thudding of his bean.
Are you leaving, sir?
The left drawer, I think you said?
The lowest of the drawers to your...
Yes, sir. The lowest of the drawers to your left. I can guarantee nothing, however, sir. My mistress keeps a small needier there, or perhaps I should say she did so not long.
Ago, it may, however... Silk had already jerked out the drawer, groping under what seemed to be at least 100 pairs of women's hose. His fingers discovered not one, but 2 metal objects. My mistress is sometimes careless regarding the safety catch, sir. It may be well to exercise due caution until you have ascertained its condition. I don't even know what that is.
Silk muttered as he gingerly extracted the first. It was a needier so small that it lay easily in the palm of his hand, elaborately engraved and gold-plated. The thumb-sized ivory grips were inlaid with golden hyacinths, isogene water, and a minute heron scanned a golden pool for fish at the base of the rear sight. For a moment Silk too knew peace, lost in the flawless craftsmanship that had been lavished upon every surface. No venerated object in his mansion was half so fine.
Should that discharge, it could destroy my glass, sir. Silk nodded absently. I've seen needlers I saw 2 tonight. In fact, that could eat this one. You have informed me that you are unfamiliar with the safety catch, sir. Upon either side of the needier you hold, you will observe a small movable convexity. Raised, it will prevent the needier from discharging. This,
Silk said, like the grips, each tiny boss was marked with a hyacinth, though these were so small that they're minute. Perfect florets were almost microscopic. He pushed one of the bosses down, and the other moved with it.
Will it fire now? I believe so, sir. Please do not direct it toward my glass. Glasses are now irreplaceable, sir, the art of their manufacture having been left behind when, I'm greatly tempted nevertheless, in the event of the destruction of this glass, I should be unable to deliver your message to Auk, sir, in which case there'd be no need of it. This smooth bar inside the ring is the trigger, I suppose? I believe that is correct, sir. Silk pointed the needier at Die Wardrobe and pressed the trigger. There was a sharp snap, like the cracking of a child's whip. It doesn't seem to have done anything, he said. My mistress's wardrobe is not a living creature, sir. I never thought it was my son. Silk bent to examine it.
Ward.
Silk bent to examine the wardrobe's door. A hole, not much thicker than a hair, had appeared in one of its polished panels. He opened Die door again. Some, though not all, of the gowns in line with the hole showed ragged tears, as if they had been stabbed with a dull blade a little narrower than his index finger. I should use this on you. You know, my son. He told the monitor, for Auk's sake. You're just a machine, like...
He score in our bowl.
Elcourt. I am a machine, but not just a machine, sir. Nodding mostly to himself, Silk pushed up the safety catch and dropped the little needier into his pocket. The other object hidden under the stockings was shaped like the letter T. The stem was cylindrical and oddly rough, with a single, smooth protuberance below the crossbar. The crossbar itself seemed polished and slightly curved, and had upturned ends. The entire object felt unnaturally cold, as reptiles often do. Silk extracted it from the stockings with some difficulty and examined it curiously. Would it be convenient for me to withdraw, sir? The monitor asked. Silk shook his head. What is this? I don't know, sir, he regarded
the monitor narrowly. Can you lie on...
He regarded the monitor narrowly.
Can you lie under extreme provocation, my son? Tell an untruth? I know a Chem quite well, and she can, or so she says. Which leaves me not a whit the wiser. Silk seated himself on the stool again. I suppose not, sir. I think I know what this is, you see.
Silk held the T-shaped object up for tea.
Silk seated himself on the stool again. I suppose not, sir. I think I know what this is, you see. Silk held the T-shaped object up for the monitor's inspection. It gleamed like polished silver. I'd appreciate confirmation and some instructions on how to operate it. I am afraid I cannot assist you, sir. Although I would be glad to receive your own opinion, I think it's an Azoth. I've never actually seen one, but we used to talk about them when I was a boy. One summer all of us made wooden swords, and sometimes we pretended they were Azoths. Charming, sir? Really, Silk muttered, scrutinizing the flashing gem in the pommel of the Azoth. We were as bloodthirsty as so many little tigers, and what's charming about that? But anyway, an Azoth is supposed to be controlled by something called a demon. If you don't know about Azoths, you don't know anything about that, I suppose. No.
The monitor's floating face swung from side to side, revealing that there was no head behind it.
If you wish to conceal yourself, sir, should you not do so at once? My master's steward, and some of our guards are searching the suites on this floor. How do you know that?
Silk asked sharply.
I have been observing them. I have glasses in some of the other suites, sir. They began at the north end of the corridor.